Hello, everybody. Happy day wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're watching this live or you are watching the recording. Welcome. My name is Natalia Hansen, and I am the marketing coordinator for Humane Canada Summit for Animals, which is the biggest, boldest, and I should say the most amazing conference for the animal welfare, sheltering, and advocacy sector in Canada. And we are sold out. The conference is happening next week. And this is actually the last of the live stream series that we are doing with some of our speakers. I'm very excited to introduce you to my colleague, Kerri Thomson. She's waiting in the wings. And we are going to talk about inclusive housing policies today. So if you are tuning live, whether you are on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook, I encourage you to type your questions in the chat or your comments or your concerns, and we'll get Kerri to interact with you because that's the goal of these live streams to give you, the viewers, a sneak peek into the speakers and the types of sessions that we have at the conference. Like I said, the conference is sold out for this year, but we highly encourage you to add your name to our email list, which you can do at humanecanada.ca/summit. So you can find out where and when we are hosting the conference in 2026. All right, so let me tell you about our guest today. Kerri Thomson is the Manager of Justice and Legislative Affairs at Humane Canada. She's been with our organization for about 3.5 years. She's also a licensed member of the Law Society of Ontario with a postgraduate certificate in victimology and is currently completing her degree in criminology and policing at Wilfrid Laurier University. I have no idea how she finds the time to do all of this, to be honest. So let's bring you out. Hello, Kerri. Good morning.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Love the background. Love that you're representing him in Canada.
Same.
Good. Branding is spot on. Alrighty. So I want us to get right into this subject because I feel like there's a lot to cover. And again, we may have some people who interact in the chat. So I want to make sure we give enough space and an opportunity for them to have their questions or their comments answered and highlighted. So why don't we start off by you please giving us an overview of the rental landscape for pet guardians across Canada?
Okay, well, the rental landscape is a little bit probably patchwork would be the best way to look at it. There's about 7 million dogs and 8 million cats who call Canada their home. And they live in more than half of Canadian households. But across most of the country, provincial tenancy legislation makes no mention or reference to animals and often leaves discretion entirely up to the property owner or landlord. So Ontario is the only one that makes a no pets clause in a standard rental agreement void and of no effect. But there's no limitation on them saying that there are no pets allowed in their advertising or screening of prospective tenants. So that wasn't problematic for a long time, but the limited supply of rental accommodations, not only with the increasing costs and everything, but there's been incidents of tenants being denied because of their pets. So there's an increase in that no pets allowed sort of language in advertisements and in discussions with prospective tenants. So not to be alarmist, but the reality is that there are no real protections for people with animals anywhere across Canada.
That's too bad. And I've lived in Ontario. Actually, it's the only province or territory in Canada where I've lived, and I've faced that myself. If people are watching this live, I would love for them to add in the comments if they've been rejected from renting a place because they have a pet. Can you repeat again how many millions of dogs and cats there are? Because I thought that was very interesting.
There's more than 7 million dogs and 8 million cats in Canada,
Seven
as an
million
estimate.
dogs. That's an estimate. So it's pretty much on par, almost on par. And yeah, I think more than one person, I can guarantee who is watching this, whether live or the replay, may say like, "Yep, I've been there. I was trying to rent a place and it clearly says no pets allowed. And pets are part of our family. I would
Mhm.
love for you to talk about that because I know there's a recent statistic. I know you were part of this in how us Canadians perceive pets as part of our family. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So recently we did a partnership with the University of Saskatchewan researchers and Paws in Places with Dr. Colleen Dell, who researches this topic in Saskatchewan and across Canada. So I think it was 84% of Canadians thought of their animals as a member of their family. And that is consistent with a lot of the other sort of surveys that we've seen, that it ranges from anywhere between 70% to 95%. So it's becoming increasingly clear that pets are not just an animal to a lot of Canadians, that they're more like members of their family. So, but that's not reflected in a lot of our policies and especially in our rental policies.
Yep, definitely not. But I know that's why we're grateful we have people like you working with us at Humane Canada because I know you work, part of your work entails Humane Canada's Pet Inclusive Housing Initiative. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yep. So it officially began probably last summer. We were asked to meet with Housing, Infrastructures, and Communities Canada, who was putting together their blueprint for Renters' Bill of Rights that came out in the budget of 2024 as a promise from the Trudeau government. So it began before that, unofficially, over the previous year, where we were hearing from our members, there was an increase in surrenders from across Canada due to limited housing availability or a lack of pet inclusive housing in general. So that is on par with previous sort of Canadian shelter surveys that Humane Canada has conducted, where housing issues like moving and landlord concerns and challenges in finding that accommodation that accepts animals has always been sort of a problem. But we started hearing it more from Ontario members. So the increased cost of living was definitely a factor in that, and surrenders of so many animals that were adopted during the pandemic was compounding those issues into a perfect
Yeah.
storm where our members were basically overwhelmed with animals, and people that they are trying to help. So we started a campaign to raise awareness of the lack of pet inclusive housing being a contributing factor to the housing crisis, and that was anchored by a national parliamentary petition and the Ontario survey on renting with pets.
I would like to add something here for anyone who's watching. When Kerri refers to members, so Humane Canada is a federation of humane societies and SPCAs. So our members are these organizations that we represent at the national level. So just to throw a couple of names out there in Ontario, some of our members are Toronto Humane Society, Ottawa Humane Society, just to name two, to make it very clear. And that's what we intend to do. We intend to represent and be a voice for them at the national level. And as Kerri was saying, due to the pandemic or other reasons, our members were flooded with animals. It was so interesting because I remember during the pandemic, the first year in 2020, the big news was the shelters are empty, empty cages. You know, it was like a historical thing. And then people started going back to work, going back to their routines, and then they were filled up again. So thank you for working on this initiative. And I do remember that was a very popular petition,
Mhm.
right? It garnered a lot of signatures. So I think this clearly demonstrates that this issue of pet inclusive housing is important to Canadians. But again, just to confirm, that petition was only relevant to Ontario,
No, the
correct?
petition was
No,
national.
it was
The
Canada.
survey that we conducted was only Ontario, and the petition nationally got more than 19,000 signatures. So,
Amazing. That's incredible. That's really cool. Actually, now that you're talking about the survey, again, these quick live streams are just a sneak peek about the sessions and the speakers that we are going to have at the conference. We don't have time to go through everything. Plus, we don't want to give everything away. We have to save the best for last. We have to save the best for the conference. But I know that in your presentation, you are going to talk about that survey. So, can you please give us a sneak peek about those results? How many people responded? Just tell us a little bit about it,
Sure.
please.
So, without wanting to give too much away, we had more than 300 anonymous responses to the survey. And the numbers were interesting that came out of that. So, for example, we had 82% of those who responded had felt that they had been barred from applying or attempting to obtain rental housing because of their animals. And that 94% of people thought that there should be standardized rules across Canada for tenants and landlords that would allow for pets within a reasonable circumstance. But what I was most interested in was were the responses to the open-ended questions that we asked. So that gave people a chance to kind of share their experiences anonymously with their whole rental experience in Ontario. The alleged no pets void sort of clause is what our province is famous for. So a lot of those responses were heartbreaking and frankly rage inducing in a lot of cases. But a couple of them were absolutely wild. Like one was asked about their animal husbandry skills. So, like, who asks that? And what does that even have to do with anything at all?
Mm.
So, it was a very, very interesting survey, particularly with the qualitative responses we received.
That is so interesting that you're saying the open-ended questions because I find that, for example, us at the conference of the Summit for Animals, we obviously want to gauge people's experience so we can improve, so we can pivot, etc. And sometimes those open-ended questions don't get filled out. Like people just don't take the time to respond. But again, it sounds like this is an issue that really matters to people because we see our pets as family. I am one of those, I must admit. So very interesting. And I know you'll go into more depth about the survey results at the conference in your presentation. So thank you for giving us a quick sneak peek. So something else that I wanted to ask you is we know that these no pets policies, when it comes to renting, affect vulnerable beings such as women and children, and it also affects our animal
Mhm.
shelters because of what we just talked about a couple of questions ago. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, vulnerable populations, when they're looking for rental housing in general, already experience barriers just because of the current rental climate with the costs. And often they're living on a fixed income or a lower income. So people with like seniors or persons with disabilities are receiving social assistance in many cases. So they are automatically barred from a lot of rental housing that's available there. Young people just starting out who are looking for their new place on their own, away from their parents, are also affected. Their incomes aren't, terribly high. They're just
Mm,
starting out. What if they wanted to bring that cat that they've had since, they started high school or even in grade school? And what happens to them when they are consistently encountering no pets allowed in advertisements? Women and children leaving violent situations in the home are also particularly vulnerable because not only are they leaving with often, very little because financial abuse is usually part of that scenario, but they're also leaving, if they have to leave their animal behind, that animal is vulnerable to abuse. Um, and they can't take animals to many emergency shelters in Canada because a lot of them don't have the accommodations that allow for pets. Only 28% of facilities for victims of abuse in Canada offered pet accommodations in 2022 and 2023. So, with statistics like that, it's really kind of no wonder that 56% of Canadian women surveyed in a previous survey done nationally in 2018, I believe, delayed leaving abusive homes because they could not secure housing with their pets. And out of 60% of women who were experiencing domestic violence, who had no other choice but to leave their pet behind with their abuser, a third of them reported that they were considering going back out of fear for their animal's life.
And I totally understand that. I mean, thankfully, I have never been in that position. Hopefully, never will be in a situation of interpersonal or domestic violence. But I just couldn't imagine, because if you do manage to escape, but you leave your pets behind, you're not going to be at
No.
ease, because you're going to be thinking about those pets, and you are going to think, what kind of harm could they be experiencing because I'm not there to
Mm-hmm.
protect them? It's a bigger issue. This is a bigger issue. Only 28% of shelters, please correct me if I'm wrong, accept pets, of shelters for survivors of domestic violence. Only 28% of shelters across Canada.
Yeah,
Is that
that
right?
was based on 2022, 2023 numbers. So it could have increased from there. The ACT project did a significant amount of work towards encouraging shelters to add sort of accommodations for pets, be it through temporary fostering or sort of showing them how they can add animals into their existing shelter facilities.
Actually, this is a perfect opportunity to plug our very own ACT team, ACT project. So ACT stands for, Kerri, remind
Action,
me.
collaboration, and tools.
Thank you. Action. He was like, what is that? Yes, action, collaboration, and tools to end violence. And there are a lot of free resources in the form of webinars, printable documents, worksheets, etc., which everybody can access through learning.humanecanada.ca. And for example, if you're watching this and you are somebody who works in the field of women's or children sheltering to support survivors of domestic or interpersonal abuse, get on those courses, get on those resources, and see if there's anything that you can implement where you work, or how to support other survivors. Great resources. It's a perfect time to just, I have to plug that there. I have to say it. Okay, so that's thank you for sharing that. Do you know, you just spoke about that survey from 2022, 2023. Do you know where it was, let's say 10 years ago? Because if
Oh.
we were at 28%, no idea, we don't have data.
Yeah, 15, 20 years ago, there would be anywhere from 0 to maybe 5%. So it's
Wow.
relatively
Okay.
new. So there is progress. It's just people have
Yeah.
to remember that progress is slow, especially when it comes to the law
Yes.
or changing the law or changing institutional policies. So,
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I know we love animals. We want to see changes happening now. We have a long way to go as a country in terms of legislation, protection, etc. I get it. But like Kerri said, progress, unfortunately, sometimes is slow. Um, Humane Canada was part of a coalition of organizations and stakeholders that passed a bill in 2018, 19, I think it was 19, it was before the pandemic, called Bill S203, commonly known as the Free Willy Bill because of the whale, the famous movie, and it banned the captivity of whales and dolphins for entertainment purposes. And that bill was 5 years in the making. So that's just a reminder, if you're watching this and if you're someone who has signed one of our petitions, one of our pledges, please don't get discouraged or frustrated if you don't see a bill passing immediately. It takes time, and there are so many other things that we just can't control. For example, when we have a change in government, it's
yep,
can't do much about that.
don't get me
So,
started.
it is what it is. I know. And look at, for example, Kerri, like she's working in the trenches. So imagine how frustrating it could be for someone like her. You work on something for months or years, and then suddenly,
Yep.
yeah. So we won't get her started on this. We're having a lovely conversation, so let's just keep things nice and cool. I just want to highlight a comment here from Jennifer. Hello, Jen. Okay, let me see what it says. I just want to read it out loud because I think some of it is cut off. I think this brings up a larger issue of the gap between how people see their companion animals and how the government and institutions sees or ignores companion animals.
Yes.
Yep, I agree with that, Jen. And then we have Brenna Clark, who's also joining on LinkedIn, says, absolutely. My understanding is that they are still legally considered
Yep.
property in most jurisdictions.
All
Actually,
jurisdictions.
yeah, Kerri, can you talk a little bit
Yep.
about that? How animals are seen as property, not like kids.
No.
Because, when a couple separates or divorces, kids are not property, pets are. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Well, that enters the whole family law sphere, and the only jurisdiction in Canada that has any legislation around that is BC. Just passed the Family Law Act that came into effect last January in 2024, which includes a section for companion animals. So they positioned it as they're more than just property, so more than like a couch or a chair or a table. But they're not quite the status of children because people really object to that when you try to talk about that. Um, so they're somewhere in the middle, but they have to consider the best interests of the companion animal in in the separation or divorce proceedings. So that's huge. That was a huge step forward. So, and there's some
Hmm.
people who are, encouraging that to come to other jurisdictions like Ontario and, across Canada, which we would definitely be on board with.
Absolutely. I don't see who wouldn't. Thanks, BC. Woohoo, BC paving the way. I want to highlight, I can't show them on the screen, unfortunately, but there are some comments coming from Instagram from Elizabeth Torres Coach. And Elizabeth says, this needs to be told more. There's still people who don't know. And I agree. Absolutely. There are still a lot of issues that affect animals and affect us, our
Mhm.
caregivers, that we are not familiar with. And that's why everybody needs to keep an eye on Humane Canada's social media and help us spread the word. Honestly, that's a great way to help us tell other people what is happening in many aspects. I love that. Thank you, Elizabeth, for participating and for your lovely comment. Okay, Kerri, so I wanted to ask you as well. So your session is happening next week. Very exciting. We have almost 500 people. Can you believe that? Almost 500 delegates from all across Canada, from the United States, and even from as far as Australia. Shout out to the Aussies, because that is quite a trek. So, what are some of those takeaways or key messages that you want attendees to walk away after they attend your
Well,
session?
thankfully, it won't be 500 people attending my session. At least I hope not, because that would be terrifying. But yeah, almost 500 people attending Summer for Animals is amazing.
Yeah.
So from my session, what I would like people to walk away with is if you're a landlord or a property owner, an understanding that not all tenants with pets are bad and are going to automatically cause damage. So there's research from the US in 2019 that states that only 9% of companion animals cause damage to rental property, and that those costs averaged around like less than $200. I think it was $191 US. So, with so many people in Canada that do have companion animals and that do consider those animals family, there needs to be some sort of middle ground and some kind of compromise and open dialogue between the two parties. So, that includes an understanding as well from tenants that they are going to have landlord and property owner concerns about possible damage, especially if they've had negative experience of tenants with animals in the past.
Yeah.
So one response from the survey sums it up better than I possibly could. So, and they said someone who would allow their pet to damage a property would also likely damage it themselves. So pet owners shouldn't be denied based on their pets.
You know what I love? I love that you're armed with a lot of statistics. You have the data. You're talking about surveys, this much percent. I love that because I feel like the data doesn't lie. At least there's a lot of power to
Mhm.
it. And you're right. I mean, I think it's important as well to see it from the landlord, from the owner's
Yep.
perspective, because the damages, etc., repairs. So I totally get it. And like you said, some of them have had potentially bad experiences in the past. So it's completely understandable, but they need to understand, like what you said, not all pets are bad. It's not going to happen in every single
Mhm.
instance. So I think that's important to highlight as well. And the last question that I'm going to ask you is who should attend this session? Because we just talked about how there will be almost 500 people. Don't worry, Kerri, not at your session, I hope. um, but we have attendees from diverse areas within the animal welfare sheltering and advocacy sectors. We have Humane Society and SPCA's employees, we have academia, we have veterinarians. So, who would you say this session is for?
It could be basically for anyone because pet inclusive housing affects all of us. So anyone who's interested in pet inclusive housing from an academic perspective, from a social services perspective, from a animal services perspective, um, who is interested in it either personally or professionally and curious about how the Ontario No Pets Void clause actually works in real life would probably want to attend this session.
Mm. Honestly, I agree with you. I think this is something that really applies to, for example, I don't work in human animal support services. I don't work in academia. I don't work in policy making. But I am a pet owner. I am a dog mom, proud dog mom. And like I said at the top, I've been affected by these no pets rental policies. I've been denied being able to be with my pets. I had a cat. I was in Ottawa. I couldn't bring her with me. Thankfully, a lovely friend of mine took care of her for me for that time. And I was my cat's sugar mama because I didn't live with her, but I paid for everything, her food, her litter box, vaccines, everything. But it was sad. I really wanted her with me. So this is something that I, as a pet owner, as a pet guardian, as a pet mom, I would be interested in learning more about what's going on in this realm and what can we do to change
Mhm.
this, because we do have power. We may believe that, oh, who am I? I am not a politician. You don't have
No.
to be. Guess what? You don't have to be a politician. You don't have to work in parliament. You don't have to be a prime minister. You have a
Mhm.
voice. And that's proven by these petitions that we've launched, by the surveys. So please, really, like if you are passionate about anything, and this applies to housing laws, housing policies, this applies to anything, if you care about something, you'll find a way where you can be an advocate. And it doesn't mean changing careers, it doesn't mean anything extreme.
No.
No, you can add your name to a petition, for example.
Mhm.
That's a place to start. So, Kerri, what are you excited about at the Summit for Animals, aside from presenting the session, of course?
Oh, I don't even know where to start. There's so many sessions to choose from. It's going to be really, really tough to try to figure out how to attend them all. Like, can I split myself into three people and attend everything? Because that's ideally what I would like to do. There's sessions on like specifically on community engagement and advocacy that I'm interested in. Um, yeah,
Mhm.
it's yeah. It's that's part of the great thing about Summit and the bad thing about Summit at the same time because there's so much to choose from that you're like, "Oh my god, how am I gonna
Yeah.
do everything?" But you find a way. You find a way.
It's true. It's true. It's like yeah, it's so hard. Like you said, like can I split myself
Yeah,
into three because you look at the
yeah.
schedule and it's like, oh, I want to attend this and oh, but this one as well, and they're happening at the same time. Ah, yikes. And yeah, we had a lot of fantastic submissions, presentation proposals for this year's conference. Like we exceeded our goal by over
Oh, wow.
100%. I remember I was telling my colleagues, like, can we make this like a week long conference? Because there's just so many amazing topics. And yeah, that's the thing. You'll find a way to make it happen and connect and check out the sessions that you're interested in. Thank you so much for your time, Kerri. Lovely chatting with you. Obviously, I am biased because I know Kerri. We work together at Humane Canada. But yeah, I'm very looking forward to seeing you in Montreal in just a couple of
I
days
know.
at the end of this week. I can't
Just
believe
a
it.
few days.
And for anyone who's watching, if you took action early and you registered, congratulations. Brownie points to you. We will see you in Montreal very soon. If you didn't register and you're feeling like, yikes, I wish I was there, I still encourage you to go to the website, putting it right here on the screen at the bottom, humanecanada.ca/summit. Go ahead and browse through the sessions, the schedule, read up on our speakers, become acquainted with them. Connect with them on LinkedIn if you didn't get a chance to meet them this year at the conference. Kerri, I know, posts on LinkedIn fairly often. Connect with her right there. There's still 2026. And for that, I encourage you as well to add your name to our conference email list. We don't spam. We don't have time for that, to be honest. We only send emails about it once, two times per month. and it's very informative information. Alrighty, so before we close, Kerri, any final words, any final thoughts, a call to action, a takeaway for anybody who's watching this?
I don't know. Hopefully to see you at
No,
Summit.
okay, that's
And,
it.
if not, then keep an eye on our page because we'll be posting the report on the pet inclusive housing survey soon.
Exactly, exactly. Keep an eye on our website, keep an eye on our social media. Thank you to everybody who watched this live, and to those who are watching the replay, thank you as well. And this wraps up. It's a wrap for the live stream series for the 2025 Summit for Animals. So thank you to our 19 speakers, including yourself, Kerri, who gave us their time very generously to talk about their sessions, talk about their experience, and we will see you very soon in Montreal. Stay safe, everybody, and have a fantastic